Well, Ed, it is truly our delight to see you here and to ask you to join us in presenting again and again and again. I think we've been working at least decades together. But let me give those who don't know you a quick introduction. Ed Thompson is the former California Director and Senior Associate of the American Farmland Trust, who has just recently begun a retirement. And Ed, how many years has it been? 28?
With AFT, 36.
30. I missed it by a decade, but
Only 1 decade.
But thank you.
It's 7 years at EDF before that, and so yeah. I go back to Earth Day.
But Ed really has looked out for California's well-being, but I have to say has also looked out for our nation's well-being when it comes to ag land preservation. And the work that you and your team have done and continue to do, Ed, is just remarkable. It's this morning's conversation was rather poignant because we have a lot more to do in terms of preserving ag land, preserving water. But thank you for your investment in this and in us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Well, great. Thank you for those kind words. It's I haven't been retired long enough to kind of know what it's all about yet. And I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about farmland, and so I don't think I'm going to totally disappear here. But it has been quite a ride, and I feel like I've contributed. So again, thank you, and you all here certainly have contributed too. Not, most recently by calling this all-day session on farmland. We don't pay enough attention to it. It's really that simple, and we need to do that. So you asked me to come here and talk about our new report on the San Joaquin Valley, but I also wanted to sort of add a little addendum to it at the end about sort of the general trends and so forth. So let me just give you a little background on this. This was part of the San Joaquin Valley Green Print program funded by the Strategic Growth Council, one of 3 pilot projects that they funded. And our purpose here, let me see, there must be one of these little, oops. There we go. Our purpose was to try to quantify and map patterns of both agricultural land, the relative quality of it, and of the water resources, particularly the reliability of those sources, as they affect decisions about how we allocate resources, how we manage resources in the future. Sort of the unstated premise here is that we've treated land and water as separate things, as if agriculture doesn't need both of them to produce food. And water naturally has received much more attention than the land, right? So in the recent drought, we learned that 500,000 acres or more were fallowed because of the lack of water. But over the last few decades, we've lost 1.5 million acres worth of farmland. It's gone forever. So that just kind of, there's a disconnect here. We're trying to connect the two, try to map the intersection of these resources and try to offer a little different perspective on it. The other thing I want to say in preface is that this is a very complicated matter, a little daunting to undertake it. And as soon as we got into it, we realized there's so many assumptions that one has to make, both about which data to use, how to weight them, how to treat them, and how to arrange them. And we made a really good faith, honest effort to make assumptions that are realistic. We consulted a lot of experts. We used the best data available. But I'll be the first one to say that if one wanted to change some of the assumptions, you're going to get a somewhat different outcome. So take this as a really good faith effort to do this mapping, but it could come out different. I'll show you as we go on here. I hope you can see this. I tried to make it as big as possible and try to condense it all down. Basically, we looked at both land and water, and we used a logic model, a thing up in the top left, for both of them. And if you can read it, you will see that we used 8 different sets of data, 4 of which describe basically the positive aspects of the land, 4 of which describe negative aspects in that they limit production, whereas the former enhance production or things like groundwater recharge that are indirectly related to production. So we combined all that data together. We gave each of those 8 equal weight in the equation, as it were. Here's an example of where we could have made different assumptions. If you wanted to give aquifer recharge areas more weight, the outcome would be somewhat different. Having done all that, then we basically asked the computer to divide. We had something like 340,000 separate little units, 18-acre units in the valley that we're mapping. That's how fine-grained this is, and data on all of them. We asked the computer to take all these 340,000 data points and put them on a curve, and then divide it up into 3 pieces based on where the natural breaks occur. Think of stair steps, right? And so we didn't. We use something called the Jenks process. It's accepted in academic circles. We didn't want to bias the analysis by saying, here, take the top 25. We'll let the computer do it. So here's what we came out with. You see that roughly 40%, 2 point whatever, I can't read that far, 2 point something million acres fell into the high quality land category. Another 2.5 million into the medium, and roughly whatever that is, 1.2 million in the lower quality. And over on the map, over on the right, you see the map that reflects those 3 colors, green being the best land, red being poorer land, and yellow in the middle, based on soil productivity and on disabilities like saline soils, and recent fallowing was one of the things we used as an indicator that land might not be as good as some other land. So that's what you have. And I think the main takeaway right there is that only 40% of the land in this spectacular valley really is of the highest value. Again, you can make value judgments about that, and like I said, you make different assumptions. You might increase or decrease that a little, but I think the basic finding here is that not all land's created equal, and we'll see more about that. So here's what we did. Here's the equivalent what we did on the water side. It's a little different. Land stays there, water moves around, right? So we looked at 3 different sources. We looked at local surface water, that is water coming into the valley from watersheds that drain into the valley. We looked at imported surface water, water coming from watersheds outside the valley, namely through the delta primarily. And then we looked at groundwater. For the surface water, we did a multiplication exercise. We calculated the percentage of the total supply for any given planning area that the Department of Water Resources used, and there are 14 of them. The map on the right shows these circles. I'll explain in the middle, but there are 14 planning regions. The percentage of the total water supply in that region that comes from that source multiplied by the variability of that resource. We took 10 years worth of data, the most recent we had, again from DWR, and the variability was a calculation of the deviation, standard deviation around the mean, for those of you who are mathematically inclined. But it basically measures how variable, how more or less reliable the supply has been. So if you depend heavily on a source and it's very, very variable, you're going to get a lower or a higher water stress score. For groundwater, it was a little bit different. Again, we took the percentage of the total that comes from groundwater, and what we looked at there, instead of variability, because it's really not, hasn't heretofore been regulated, we looked at the depth to groundwater, which affects how costly it is to pump it to the surface, and we looked at the change in the depth to groundwater, which gives you an idea of how rapidly it's being drawn down, and those we combine into a score for groundwater. So when we put all those 3 things together, just one digression. You look at the map over there on the right and all these circles, you'll see that the circles are all divided into green, blue, and orange. Green is local, blue is imported, orange is groundwater. It shows you the percentages that come from each of those sources in each of those regions. And the size of the circle indicates how much water is being used by ag in that area. That gives you a little picture of how the data fit into the model. The pie chart at the left shows you that, again, we used the same computerized approach to look at high, medium, and low. And it shows that only about a third of the land has low water stress. Almost 2/3 has moderate water stress. And, excuse me, somewhere around 6% has high water stress.
How are you defining water stress?
Well, again, it's a mathematical calculation based on how much a given area relies on a particular source and how variable that source is for surface water, and how much the groundwater depth is changing for groundwater. I wish I could give you a better answer and say, okay, well, if an area depends 50% on imported water and the supply varied 20%, then it's high. With enough parsing of this data, I could probably give you some of those answers. But
and then what were the numbers above the circular pie?
Those numbers are simply the designation that the Department of Water Resources has for those different planning areas. That's how they aggregate data for surface water supplies. So the map just changed on you right there. This is what the water stress map looks like when you add all those three sources and the variability and the drawdown of groundwater. You see that in Kern County in particular, that's where the highest water stress is right now. South of Fresno, and on the west side, it's pretty severe. When you get above North Fresno and the eastern side of the valley, the water stress is not as severe. So then the question is, what happens when you overlay these two things together? And here's what it looks like. Now, the way you read this map is that the color, red, yellow, or green, determines the level of water stress, right? So red is high, green is low. The intensity of the color, they're dark, there's a dark red going all the way down to pink, for example, indicates the quality of the land. So dark green indicates the highest quality land with the lowest water stress, right? And here again, you can see when you combine those two things that there's high quality land going all the way up the east side there that's either dark red or dark orange or dark green, but the water reliability situation changes dramatically from north to south. So you have green in the north, which is more reliable water, oranges and yellows in the middle, and then down to the red in the southern part of the valley. So the chart on the left is, we have all these charts and data and things that are going to come out when we finally publish this thing. But I highlighted a couple things on there. One is that dark green land that I mentioned, high quality land with low water stress, amounts to somewhere over 700,000 of the 6 million acres of irrigated land in the valley. That's only about 12%. If you add up all the land that either has high water stress or low quality, these are indicators of problems to come in agriculture, it amounts to about 1.5 million acres, or about a quarter of all the land in the valley is experiencing those conditions. So that, this kind of gives you, we hope, a little different picture of the valley and its agricultural land and water resources than we've seen in the past. We weren't content to just look at the status quo, though. We decided that we would try to calculate the potential impact of the implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and of a proposal by the Water Resources Control Board to require 40% of natural stream flow in the three northernmost tributaries of the San Joaquin River, Stanislaus, Merced, and Tuolumne. And we calculate, for Sigma, we calculated the amount of groundwater that would be unavailable if recharge and use of groundwater are balanced. Again, we're using DWR figures for all of this. For the Sigma tributaries, we did, for the San Joaquin tributaries, we did something similar in that we reduced the amount of water available if the Department of Water Resources Control Board target were met. And what you see here are the results. Under the bar graphs give you the profile of the water stress situation. The first cluster is the current situation when you have a fairly small amount of land subject to high water stress, and a third of the land is actually very low water stress. You implement Sigma, that 6% that's in high water stress climbs to about 30% of the acreage in the valley would be under high water stress, and you can see that most of that comes from the land that is now low water stress. Under the San Joaquin River tributaries, the impact is similar, although not quite as great. So if you do a further refinement of that analysis, this is the chart in the bottom left. You see that those two groups I mentioned before, the high quality land with low stress that was green, it's now 12% of the land in the valley. Under Sigma, that would drop to about 6%. And under the San Joaquin River proposal, down to, I think that's 9. I can't really read it from here. Whereas if you looked at those other two categories, low quality land or high water stress, it's now 24% of the acreage in the valley. That could climb to as much as 41% under Sigma, and roughly a third under the San Joaquin Valley tributary scenario. We did not try to calculate the impact of the combination of those two proposals, but undoubtedly it would be a little higher. Let me show you what these look like on the map. Both of these show the status quo map that I showed you before, and when I click this, you look at the map at the left, you will see it change to reflect what it would look like under Sigma. You can see a lot of the green disappears, a lot of the yellow turns to pink. Interestingly enough, the dark red down there, Kern doesn't change very much because it's already very stressed. The map on the right, again, the status quo. When I click this, it will show the impact of the tributaries proposal. You can see that the impact is limited exclusively to the northern part, to San Joaquin, Stanislaus, and Merced counties. And the data that goes along with this is there would be about 500,000 acres in those three counties alone that would shift from low water stress to high water stress as a result of this. So, I think this sort of confirms what people have been saying, that these kind of things are really going to have a serious impact. Again, you can make different assumptions, you may come out with slightly different results, but the fact that they do tend to reflect what people are saying and thinking, I think is a good indication that we're sort of on track here. Go ahead.
Is the data data you're using based on historical numbers or drought? The 2016 numbers. What is the data based on that you're arriving at these conclusions?
As I recall, the period we looked at was 2002 to 2012. So there's some drought years in there. There's some, quote, normal years in there, too. This is the best, most recent data we had from DWR. We also looked at the potential impact of development, since we've been talking about farmland conservation. And here we used, I'm not going to show you the logic model here, but it's similar in that any land that was within a city limit or a sphere of influence or earmarked in a general plan for development was considered at high risk of development. We used a Department of Conservation forecast of growth in the valley on top of that, and we considered anything that wasn't in the first category but was under the Department of Conservation projection as at medium risk. And there you will see that when you combine the two of them over in the far right column there, it's somewhere over 700,000 acres that are at risk under the status quo. Interestingly enough, if you break it down by land quality, as we did there, you will see that the percentage of low quality land that is at higher medium risk is only 6%, but when you look at the highest quality land, 16% is at high to medium risk. That's 1 out of every 6 acres of the best land we have there that's at high risk. So this kind of tries to bring it all together. Again, this is just looking at the status quo. We looked at both all the irrigated land in the valley and the highest quality land. And you will see there that, as I said, there's just over 700,000 acres of all land at development risk. Somewhere under 400,000 of that is high quality. There are 370,000 acres that are experiencing high water stress, of which a little over 200 are high quality. When you add those two together, you see there's about 1 million acres that suffer from one or the other, of which somewhere over 500,000 is high quality. That little asterisk there is to remind me that we didn't try to subtract out the overlap. There's going to be some overlap in there, but we're still in the ballpark. So when you look at the percentage of all acreage in the valley that's affected here, what you find is that 18%, almost 1 out of every 5 acres of all the land either has high water stress or high to medium development risk. And if you look, again, at the high quality land, it's a quarter of it is subject to one of these two things. If you look at how that would change under sigma, the acreage of water stress increases significantly to the point where more than 40% of all the land is either going to have high water stress or high to medium development risk, and around 40% of the high quality land as well. If you start comparing these things, again, what you find is that the impact of sigma in terms of the number of acres that shift into the high risk category, 750,000 acre, is roughly equivalent to the amount of acreage, ag land there, that is now subject to high to medium development risk. So I said earlier, we're paying a lot more attention to water than land. This suggests that, we could lose as much land to development as sigma might take out because of shrinking water supplies. So when we're talking about managing the resources in the valley, we really have to look at both of them. We need to look at the geography of them. And we hope that this initial look at this, we would invite, this was done on a platform called Database and that the Strategic Growth Council is promoting. And our partner in this, the Conservation Biology Institute, actually invented this program. The beauty of it is that you can get in there and change the assumptions, use new data, do all that. So we encourage other people, if they don't like what we did, put your own numbers in there and see what it looks like. So what did we learn? High quality land is relatively scarce in this premier farming region in the country. The land is disproportionately affected by development and water stress. Ergo, we need to do more to conserve and protect it and to make sure that it has adequate water. And when we are allocating water resources, we ought to be considering land quality. Do we want to end up with water on land that has significant disabilities associated with it, or do we want ultimately faced with the choice to have the water end up with the land that is the most productive and has the fewest disabilities. So I think these are some of the choices that we're going to face. Now, before I answer questions, I beg your indulgence for maybe another 2 or 3 minutes to just talk about kind of a broader issue that relates to what you heard a little bit more this morning here. You know, these maps are food for thought when you're thinking about what kind of goal California should be establishing. And it's not, an acreage goal isn't enough. It really has to be what kind of land and where is it and what's its capability and what's the water supply look like. So hopefully this will be input to that kind of a decision. But I would be remiss if I didn't thank the board from the bottom of my heart for the letter it sent to Strategic Growth Council a month or so ago, recommending that they establish a statewide goal. I think it's a great start, and I want to encourage you to keep up the pressure and till we get there. So we have a goal. For me, it would be not just how much can we afford to lose, how much do we want to reduce the conversion, but how much do we want to protect permanently? And that's where I want to end this thing. You know, a few years ago, the California Roundtable on Ag and Environment, you know, with all the participants over on the right there, went through a very elaborate exercise in identifying policy options and things that the state could be doing better to protect farmland. I won't go into huge detail except to highlight the two, you know, big picture things. You know, planning and land use policies need to be improved, and we also need to catch up to other states in what we're doing to fund agricultural land conservation. But as you heard this morning, you know, we're not really stacking up. Well, AFT has been working with USDA and the National Resources Inventory to do a kind of state of America's farmland. And this stuff I'm going to show you here in a couple slides is from there. This shows you how much farmland has been developed since 1982. I chose 4 other states, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, I guess 5 states, Vermont, and Delaware, not because they're agricultural powerhouses, but because they lead the nation in farmland conservation. So they're kind of a good touchstone here. So you can see California's lost a lot more farmland. Of course, it's a bigger state, population growth, and so forth, but that doesn't change the fact that we lost, you know, 1.5 million acres over the last 30 years. So when you contrast that, that's how much we've lost, with what the acreage that's been protected, you see that these states that aren't as agriculturally important as California are way ahead of California. We're under 100,000 acres. This is protected with public dollars. This is not donations to land trusts. We kind of took that off the table. But, you know, Pennsylvania and Maryland are both over 500,000 acres in roughly the same time that California's had its program. So they're way behind there. If you compare the amount of land they've protected to the amount of land that's been lost, again, you see that, you know, 4 of the states are protecting more land than they're losing. Again, California is way, way behind these other states. And if you look at the amount of money that's been invested in permanent farmland protection, you can see a couple states are over $1 billion, and one is getting close. Again, California ranks way up there with Vermont and Delaware in what it's invested over this same period of time. So we do have a lot of catching up to do. Here is this is probably the most telling of all. You know, California's a bigger state, so forth and so on. But if you look at it on a per capita basis, how much are states investing per person per year in farmland conservation? You can see, you know, it starts there with Pennsylvania at $4 per person per year, and up there on the right, Delaware is $10 per person a year. California is roughly 30 cents per person per year over that period of time. So we're not even close.
Can I ask you, you said public dollars but not including land trust. Do we know the number from land trusts or other sources and what it would be combined?
This includes state programs like SALC and CFCP, any local public dollars put into a program not from private sources, but from public sources, and the federal Farm and Ranch Land Protection Act. And again, this in response to Don's question, some of these are not habitat protection. The purpose here is to protect land for food production, so it doesn't include any dollars in there. So it doesn't include any.
So we don't have land trusts or other
Doesn't have
privately funded.
private donations, although those are often, the way these transactions get done. All these sources are combined often in a single transaction. So there's some private money in there, but it doesn't compare with the public dollars. But anyway, bottom line here is California is just not investing all that much. I mean, if we invested just as much as Pennsylvania, we'd be generating somewhere around $160, $170 million a year, which would, be a huge improvement over even the great stride we just took with SALC and $40 million a year. And I'm going to leave you with this thought. So I was involved in both the Maryland and Pennsylvania programs, been involved in a lot of local programs, very successful ones. And I think, the importance of this is, when you invest in this, you're compensating landowners for their property rights, which is a popular thing to do. You're investing in the ag economy. You're balancing out the impact of land use regulation that we've heard earlier is the most effective way to protect land in the short term. So what I've found is that when you do make this kind of a commitment that these other states are making, so that the farm community starts getting serious, when you start protecting 500,000 acres, it starts showing up on the map. And if you don't have an easement over your property, one of your neighbors probably does. It changes the whole dynamic in the farm community and builds a constituency, not just for more money for this, but for the land use policies that in effect protect those who've already made this commitment. You sold an easement over your land, you've given up the right to develop it. Do you really want to see the farm next door turned into a subdivision? No. So these two things work hand in glove. And, the San Joaquin Valley project, I think, starts to create a blueprint for, how you could arrive at a goal and so forth. But these last statistics show that, if we're really going to be serious about saving whatever land we designate or meeting whatever goal we meet, we need to invest a lot more of California's resources in protecting this resource. So I hope that's been food for thought, and I'll try to answer any questions you have.
Joy.
By overlaying water, which is brilliant, but if that land goes to development, doesn't it use as much or more water? In other words, we're not saving water by losing the land to farming. Am I correct?
Depending on what kind of development, it's going to use as much, maybe more or less.
So there's no net benefit that says, oh, well, we'll just give up the farmland in favor of conserving water. So that's not a push-pull.
In the case of development, probably not, but the signs are that we're going to have less irrigated cropland in the San Joaquin going forward as a result of. I forgot to mention, we also looked at a climate change scenario. It got too complicated, so I didn't include it in this. But again, using the most reliable figures, we estimate that the valley will need an additional 600,000 acre feet per year because of evapotranspiration, the increase in that due to the temperature. To say nothing of what happens to the Sierra snowpack. So. We know there's going to be less land in production. Not all of it could be developed, but, we need to make some very strategic decisions about, maybe some of that land could be developed.
Eric and then Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. What are the best practices in some of these other states? What are the best practices associated with funding ag land conservation program? Are they just taking it out of their general fund? Do they have some sort of special revenue source? How do they do it?
Any way they can. The politics in every state is different. When Pennsylvania started their program, they used a cigarette tax, and people weren't smoking as much, and so the revenue stream got thin, so they went to a bond measure. A lot of them are bond funded. Some of them are tax increment funded. Maryland, for example, has a 1.5% real estate transfer tax on every single transaction, residential or otherwise, that gets put into an open space fund, and ag gets a piece of that. They also have a 5% transfer tax on any land that comes out of ag into developed use. That all gets put into. So there's a whole variety of different ways they do it. I personally think that here ag mitigation could become the most important source. If we continue converting 40,000 acres a year, and you had to say a $10,000 an acre, that's $400,000, $400 million a year. And if that $10,000 are spread over, say, 10 houses on that land, $1,000 a house.
Just a quick follow-up. So it's something that's come up several times here, and you know this, Ed, but for those who don't, I work in habitat conservation, and there is sort of a theme that was that habitat conservation is getting a ton more resources than ag land conservation. Can we quantify that? I mean, because I'm I sort of feel depauperate in my world, right? Can we quantify? I mean, do we know that for certain? And I guess the follow-up is there some, again, best practice or model of combining pools of habitat? If habitat's getting 10 times more money than ag land conservation, why can't we figure out how to allocate habitat money, combine it with, to get ag land conservation? There has to be models out there of that.
That calculation is something that's been on my to-do list for a long time. Haven't quite got around to it, but I've been around here long enough to see 4, 5, 6 bond measures, open space bond measures, and I can tell you in every single one of them, it's $500 million or $1 billion for habitat, and I think one year we got 75,000 for farmland. That was the record. So I mean, you could go back and add all that up and. $15 billion. And we're not even at $100 million for state investment. So it's.
Nita wanted to.
Well, the challenge is that when these bonds go, that the ag community has not supported us because of the acquisition component. And so to even have an ag conservation bond, you need to get Farm Bureau and a lot of the groups here behind that. And there's a tension between some of the acquisition that goes for public ownership. And if there would be a way to navigate that, I think there's a lot of opportunity.
I think that's a great point, and I will tell you point blank that in the case of Maryland and Pennsylvania, and I was present at the creation of both of those, the thing that made them as successful as they did and has sustained them over all these years was the active, aggressive support of the Farm Bureau in both of those states. And since I'm retiring, I can say the Farm Bureau here has not been there for us on this. I heard some hopeful things here today, and I hope that changes.
Ben and Don Cameron, please.
Well, this was some very interesting slides. I appreciate the effort and the work that went into it. And I'm wondering what these would look like with, I appreciate the part on Sigma, but what scares me is how are we going to get water back into some of these aquifers? And I don't know whether or not the tunnels or Sykes Reservoir would help that out. to try to get some water back into these aquifers, to try to get that to change as far as the numbers on Sigma. But the other thing that was really clear to me, and I'm not a land developer, but if you take a look at 5 and the way it runs along the side of all of the good ag land, and why we're running a train up through the middle of the valley with the potential for more land development to occur in the prime ag land, is bewildering to me.
You know, I didn't say anything here about adaptation. I mean, these are kind of the pictures we painted as if nothing else happens. And there are active, as you all know. Karen could probably detail chapter and verse, as she does on everything else, about the efforts to actively recharge aquifers, moving water around, water conservation. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to happen here. What this really helps show is where the stresses are, where we need to apply those solutions, and we have to apply those solutions.
Just, Ben, you're talking about running high-speed rail along 5 instead of where we are. So I don't have the number in my head. It's actually a very minimal amount of acreage that will be lost to high-speed rail. And it is put where the people are, as opposed to on the west side of the valley, which would then draw sprawl to it. And so that's one of many rationales that were factored into when this whole route was set up.
But my whole point is when you put high-speed rail, you're going to get commuters, just like what I have in Temecula, that you're going to get people that are going to commute to the LA area, and you're going to get them to commute to San Francisco and other areas. So they want to take that ag land. They want to go out there, just like what Don said. They're going to live out in the rural community, and you divide these parcels up. And, you know, we heard them talking about what it takes to have acreage to make it commercially viable at 20-acre parcels. Well, a person living in LA won't know what to do with 20 acres of land. They don't know what to do with 2.5 acres. So to me, it's the wrong approach to be putting it into the areas where development will occur will be in the prime ag land.
It is a concern, and it's more than just the 4,000 acres that the right-of-way will take. I mean, it really is. The potential for sprawl is huge, and when they were first starting this out, we recommended that the state award stations to and grant money to those areas that would, in exchange, adopt stronger land use policies that would prevent this kind of thing, particularly rural residential development. None of these numbers I showed you considered ranchettes. They occupy a quarter of all the land that's been devoted to non-farm uses in the valley today. And I can guarantee you, if somebody wants to commute from LA to the lower part of the valley, they're probably not going to want to live in downtown Fresno, as the boosters are saying. They're probably going to want a ranchette out there on the east side somewhere, so in the citrus groves or something.
Don, final question, please.
I had a question about your graph on Sigma and your interpretation. Is that like a snapshot at 2020, or is that?
I'm sorry.
There'll be changes, there'll be implementations. Hopefully, we can make some changes by 2040. But this is essentially looking at it today. If full implementation were to happen,
this is in effect looking at it at 2040 when it would be fully implemented, and again, if nothing else happens in terms of adjusting, recharging aquifers, it basically just assumed that if the deficit use that is occurring today continued
with no change
if
whatsoever.
If we eliminated the deficit to balance it so it's
right.
sustainable, that's how much water would go away. This would be the impact when it's fully implemented, 2040 or whenever it actually happens.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Helene?
So I just had one quick question. If you look at the states that invested a lot of money into protecting farmland, they're very urban states, Maryland, New Jersey. So did they get the public involved in voting yes? It just seems like the public power to vote yes would have outvoted Farm Bureau. or anybody else that was negative?
That's a good observation, but I think it's more complicated than that. New Jersey is definitely a more urban state, and that almost $2 billion was largely the result of the leadership of Governor Christie Whitman, who basically, they looked at patterns of what was happening there and how rapidly it was urbanizing. She says, we're going to run out of all our ag land in 20 years unless we get serious now and front load the money, and that's what they did. I mean, it's called the Garden State for a reason. You get off the freeways and past the refineries, there's still an awful lot of good ag land that still grows truck crops and things. Pennsylvania and Maryland, you'd be surprised at how rural they are. Maryland, Eastern Shore over there in Delaware was another one. I mean, that's some of those beautiful farm ground in the country. And the development hasn't, except for the beaches, has not jumped the Chesapeake Bay very much from the Washington and Baltimore area. So, and they're not, California's a hugely urban state with a population that's capable of contributing a lot more to the open space and the food that they love. They just haven't been asked, I think.
Well, thank you, Ed. Even in retirement, we're going to ring your bell often and hope that you'll join us.
Well, I'm not going to disappear, and I still wake up thinking about this. So anytime you want to call on me, fine. Meanwhile, Virginia Jameson, who's been sitting back here as our interim acting director, and hopefully within a couple months at the most, we'll have a permanent full-time successor, and AFT will keep bugging you.
Great.
So.
And Virginia did a great job and continues to do on Ag Vision. Thank you so much for your heavy lifting on that.
Great. Thanks again.
Thanks, Ed. I'd like to welcome Nita Vale and Scott Spear for our final panel. Nita is Chief Executive Officer of the California Rangeland Trust, a position that she has held since September 2001. Nita, also a founding board member of the Rangeland Trust, has a background in agribusiness, policy, and environmental consulting. Nita is also a fourth-generation rancher who was brought up in the Vail Vickers ranching tradition on Santa Rosa Island. Welcome to you. And Scott is a former president of the board of directors of the Sequoia Riverlands Trust and currently serves as an emeritus board member. Sequoia Riverlands Trust is a regional nonprofit trust dedicated to strengthening California's heartland and natural and agricultural legacy of the southern Sierra Nevada and San Joaquin Valley. Welcome to you as well. Nita.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman McNamara, Secretary Ross, and the board. It's a great honor and opportunity to be here to talk to you a little bit. I'm going to flip a little bit of what Mr. Thompson shared with you and bring you to the ranch this afternoon, give you a little overview on who we are and what we do. How many have never heard of the California Rangeland Trust? Really? That's good. Be honest. I'll give you a little bit of background and talk about what we do, some of the things that we're pretty excited about going into the future. And I gave all of the board members a copy. This is something we just put together. It's really because we're going out into the philanthropy world finally. You can imagine having a board of directors who are cattlemen that don't want to ask for help, and the idea of fundraising is quite threatening. But we have great staff now, and this is something that we produced to go do that, and we're getting great interest. So just very briefly, the California Rangeland Trust was founded in 1998 by members of the California Cattlemen's Association. We're going to celebrate our 20-year anniversary. I'm very excited about that. 80% of the board are cattlemen. Recently, they voted that 3 out of the 15 could be non-producers, which I think will be very important going forward in the policy arena. When we first started, there was a lot of skepticism. The environmental community was not, well, I actually was in a line and somebody said, cattle conservationists, oxymoron. There was some distress there. The agencies thought maybe we'd be the fox guarding the hen house, and the cattlemen thought we were going to be the government controlling. So 20 years later, there's tremendous trust. We built a lot of bridges. We're very happy with the kind of partnerships that we get to enjoy today, some of whom are in the room. And this producer-led solution, because it is, we've conserved over 300,000 acres to date. We'll cross that threshold probably tomorrow. This map is hard to read, but it's an illustration. You can see the black cowboys. Those are projects that have conservation easements on them. All of those green little dots, those are pending projects. We have a waiting list of over 420,000 acres. And I think this is really important for two reasons. One, we've seen that waiting list be up to 500,000 acres, but because of funding and because of generational succession, people come off the list. They need to sell their ranch. They're looking at other ways to figure out how to move into the next generation. But the other thing that I want to talk about that's so important about this as you're looking at statewide goals, we don't ever call a landowner. These applications are formal, filed applications with maps, with environmental assessments, with all the data on the ranch, and they have made a decision. And because we don't call them and we're not dictating this, it's created this waiting list that is pretty unprecedented among the land trust community. We often have agencies call us. High-speed rail is an example. We're doing mitigation, or California tiger sound, or other endangered species, because they would like to know if we have properties on the list that may be eligible if the rancher's interested in doing a mitigation easement. We talked a little bit about the trends, and I think that this is really important. The thing that's been mentioned a couple times today is that it's not just pressure of development. It's pressure, and for rangeland, and we might be the lower quality soil on Ed Thompson's charts, but it's in competition with habitat conversion. It's competition with vineyard, walnut, intensive ag conversion as well. What is so exciting, and Catherine Lindell and I were talking about this today at lunch, is that the science around rangeland is starting to emerge as something that is a much more mainstream thing. And I think I'll talk more about this at the end. But the data is that 75% of the endangered species spend some time of their lifetime on private land nationally. And in California, this will show you our growth. There's 75 listed threatened or endangered species that are in counties that are the fastest growing counties in the state. So we're doing a lot of mitigation. We are involved. I'll talk more about it on HCPs, just hearing your questions today. It's a very complicated but very dynamic field. And we also found out that what's good for livestock is good for California tiger salamander. As an example, one rancher, Tim Copeman, who may have spoken with this board, said it's the most lucrative species that he raises on his ranch. He has 3 conservation easements. With information done by Jamie Marty and others, vernal pools, grazing is not just compatible, it's essential. And we're finding that we have conservation easements with vernal pools. The watershed, we talk, there's a lot of new data, but 85% of California's drinking water flows through the foothills and through rangeland, and managing that grazing is a tremendous opportunity for water recharge. This is one of my favorite figures about the 1% increase in soil organic matter that can store an additional 20 to 25,000 gallons of water. And this is obviously a lot of what the Healthy Soil Initiative is, and looking at the value of soil and why it's important. And things like the carbon project that Marin is doing and others, what we can do adding topsoil. I think we're going to learn a lot more about that. Carbon sequestration is a very, very important area right now. And quite honestly, climate change is not always the most positive word to use. It has sometimes a polarizing effect. And so we talk a lot about ecosystem service values and looking at a carbon sink, and you can literally see it in some of the things we teach kids in school, how when you're aerating the soil with hoofs that you're improving that. And we're really excited about the Strategic Growth Council and what's going on with the SALC program. Again, it's very interesting to see the increased demand in grass-fed beef, and without a lot of rangeland here, that is something that Whole Foods and now Amazon, I guess, and others are really looking at. And then bee pollinators. I'm sure you've talked a lot about this, but bee pollinators, rangeland is probably one of the most sought after habitats now. Finally, of course, the local economy. Believe it or not, California is 100 million acres of the state, and 20 million is still privately owned rangeland. So we are still a cowboy state, even though, we have the most crops and nationally. And my friends from other states think we're the land of fruits and vegetables or nuts. I'm not sure which. So conservation easement, I think most of you are familiar with them. You've probably talked about them here, but it basically is a restriction placed on certain rights, a bundle of rights, and it's either the sale or the donation of those rights. People can be paid through them. We're also, like I said, there's a lot of mitigation happening as well. So, for instance, you talked about why would farmers want to do an ag conservation easement when it's so lucrative to sell? Well, it's a little different with rangeland because of mitigation. Much of that habitat is on rangeland for the endangered species or other things that are through Sequoia being mitigated. You see a reduction in the tax value, and that really helps generational succession. In most cases, there's not a loss of control over public access, and that's important to ranchers and farmers, I'm assuming. And then this whole estate planning. And ranchers care deeply. Farmers care deeply about their land. Matter of fact, I'm not sure, I almost feel a little sorry for the younger generation because some of the older generation will come to us and say, we spent our lives putting these ranches together. We want to rule from the grave. We don't want them taken apart. We want them sold as an entity. And when you put a conservation easement on the land, it goes with the title of the land. It can never be split again. And we're definitely seeing this generational transition that I'm sure the board's talked a lot about. We see a much older farming and ranching generation, although we are seeing some of the younger generation coming back in, and we're trying to do some work around that. There's a tax incentive that Congress made permanent 3 years ago. It's a very significant tax incentive that if you are 100% of your incomes from farming or ranching, you can take 100% of the donation of a conservation easement over 15 years. We're seeing a lot of donated easements. If you are not filing a Schedule F or you're not a full-time farmer rancher, it's 50%, and it's still to the end of 15 years. So that's a pretty big deal. Funding sources, and Ed talked about some of this, especially with farmland. So we are able to apply for a lot of habitat money through the Wildlife Conservation Fund. And for those of you who have been around a while, in California, there's been probably $20 billion worth of bonds. Prop 12, 13, 40, 50 that have been approved by the voters. A lot of it was for acquisition, but there was money in the Wildlife Conservation Board. There was not enough money in the Department of Conservation, but we've been able to secure grants in that area. And most recently in the last 2 years, and again, really want to thank everyone involved in the SOG program. But we've been working with them with Prop 1 and again, Wildlife Conservation Board. And we have a really good staff, even though funding's diminished. Our staff's helped put together almost $30 million worth in bonds. But this is an area that really needs a lot more attention. We're working with NRCS. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but would love to work with the State Board and Department of Food and Agriculture. Our team will be back there this week lobbying in D.C. There's a lot of challenges right now with the NRCS program. There's some unknowns about will it go under FSA, what happens with the new farm bill coming up. So we actually are back there trying to really give Conservation Easement 101 to staff both in the Senate and the House. Some of our funding partners, we also work with Bureau of Reclamation and our Conservation, Department of Conservation and others, Fish and Wildlife, both state and federal. But the science is really started to emerge, and I think that that's what's so important. I want to share with you that Colorado State, and we're going to be meeting with Secretary Ross later in this week, but Colorado State through their state university, released a report, and I can send it to anyone that would like to have a copy. And in Colorado, they have a state tax credit, and they also have a lottery. So they have a lot of funding for conservation easements. And they have figured out that for every dollar invested in Colorado, the return on the investment in public benefits was $4 to $12. We'd like to see some work done in California, although California is much more complicated the way our funding sources are matriculated. So we're a member of, there's 7 cattlemen's land trusts in the United States: Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Texas, and the Northwest. Among all of our groups, we've conserved 2.2 million acres. When you go back to Congress and talk about private land conservation, that catches their attention. But what Colorado did in this study is they went through and detailed, and this is based on the modeling that some of you might be familiar with that's been done in Sonoma County and in Santa Clara County. And they figured out all the different habitat types, what those types contribute back in ecosystem services to the economy. Took an average, this is really down and dirty, but took an average and applied it to the 2.2 million acres and figured out that nationally it could be $804 million a year contributed back to the economy and ecosystem services. We are starting to work to put this data together in California. I think it's really important. There's some modeling there, as I've already said, that is gives us the place to do it. We're looking to work with UC Berkeley, but we'll talk to Davis later to try and to try and pull this together. I'm sorry, Dean Taylor. But this is somewhere where we think if we could really show the kind of value, economic value of conserving these lands in perpetuity, and by the way, it will include agricultural lands, not just rangeland, that maybe we start to make the case to the legislature, even to our own ag groups, to consumers, to show the importance of farmland and rangeland funding in the state. Because they have to, I mean, it's not just climate change. When you look at numbers, it really starts to do something, and hopefully the timing is going to let us put this together fairly quickly. I think that going forward, you talked about a statewide plan. It's complicated because going back to our waiting list, if we told landowners what to do, I can remember being on a panel early involved in the California Rangeland Trust, and it was very controversial. I think I got called a communist once because, you know, you're dictating land use. But just having that sense of it being voluntary, I think agriculture is a very show-me industry. Show me that it works. Show me that you're not going to show up and enforce my property. Show me that I'm going to be able to be flexible in my management practices. That's what happened when we first started. Once there was some trust built in the agricultural community, the floodgate opened. And so I think trying to figure out a balance of having a statewide plan, having statewide priorities, but not losing, you know, how do you make sure that landowners feel like they have control of their land, that there isn't kind of an overlay that puts these restrictions. We're seeing some of the counties where SOAR and others, they're causing some challenges for landowners to figure out what they're doing with their land. And that's not even including the overlay of some of the tribes that have, you know, are looking at TCA. So, you know, I really throw that out there, and I'd be happy to answer any more complex questions.
Nita, so I think we'll hear from Scott, and then we'll address all the questions. Thanks so much. Very, very professional.
Good afternoon, Secretary Ross and President, I can't see from there, McNamara. Again, my name is Scott Spear. I'm here on behalf of Sequoia Riverlands Trust. You'll have to excuse my voice. I spent 4 days in Springville. There's a 17,000 acre forest fire there. Went there to be ready to evacuate a friend of mine. So we've been breathing the air, and I can feel it in my throat, and you can probably hear it in my voice. So first, a little bit about Sequoia Riverlands Trust. We merged 3 land trusts in 1999, came together with a merger committee to put 3 small land trusts together with the ambition of actually doing conservation work. I characterized the 3 land trusts that were existing in Tulare County as conservation clubs. Oh, I'm doing that. Is this the changer?
There's an arrow, just on the keyboard. There's an arrow.
Oh. I'll just go real quick here. That one? There you go. It's not doing it. Oh, down. So we put 3 land trusts together, bringing, about 500 acres together to actually do conservation work. And it was a big ambition, and we really didn't know where to go or what to do. Well, fast forward 14 years, we put the land trust together. I was lucky enough to serve as chairman of the board in the first year. I retired in 2014, and we've done a lot of conservation work. But what we realized we needed to do is partner and to become part of the communities that we serve. So we partnered with industry, and a couple examples are Alcoa in Southern California, Edison. There are many of them. Even the local beer distributor will give fundraisers for us. Academia, we're partnered with Tulare County Office of Education. They bring out tours of school kids to some of our preserves. We have 6 preserves, to the tune of about 2,000 kids a year. And also with the local junior college, College of the Sequoias, they use our preserves as a outdoor lab, plant identification, animals and birds and all that kind of stuff. Also farmers and ranchers, of course. The numbers I'll just skip over. Conservation policies, we're involved and realized that to accomplish what we wanted to do, we had to sit on boards, make public testimony. Some of you might know the president of the organization, Sophie Mulholland. She couldn't be here today, so she called on me at the last minute and said, Scott, you're going to Sacramento. I volunteered. So the policies, I'll lose my place here, kids. Something that we ran into with conservation easements and the ag community is that what farmers are most familiar with when you say easement is a taking. Edison, the city, the county, right-of-ways. So we changed conservation easement. We stopped using that term in terms of introductions and said, we have a business tool we'd like to interest you. All of a sudden we had an ear as opposed to being repelled. That was a big deal for us. And like Nita mentioned, when we talk about conservation easements and policy, estate planning really is of interest to the ag community. We're also involved in smart growth and infill. If you have smart growth and infill, you automatically save farmland. So we sit on all of those, the green print, the blueprint, sustainable communities. I'm probably forgetting some of them. In order to get the message out, we believe in research right now. Well, I'll skip over that. We started the Southern Sierra Partnership, which is a partnership with the Nature Conservancy, Sierra Business Council, California Audubon, Sequoia Riverlands Trust, and Tejon Conservancy, and produced a, like Nita would say, ecosystem services, a report. Mostly the report looked at, this is an area we can do landscape scale conservation. The southern San Joaquin Valley still has single landowners that are very big in the foothills, cattle ranches, and even large farms. So this economic report we took to the cities and counties and saying, look at the value of ecosystem services. We were too early. They couldn't hear it. Maybe time will tell, and we'll come back with that. We sit on the Sustainable Communities Strategy, San Joaquin Valley Green Print, and again, we encourage our board members and staff to sit on all the local and county city communities that we can. We are, Sequoia Riverlands Trust has a mitigation service part of our land trust. We will do the southern half of the San Joaquin Valley mitigation for farmland from Fresno County south. So we work with farmers and ranchers and with the agency that is looking for farmland. And part of what is a new filter for us is SGMA. So the company that actually is identifying the farmers wants to check the box to here's 1,200 acres of the 2,400 we need in Tulare or Kings County. But we have to make sure that that 1,200 acres is sustainable in the future. So that's a big watch for us. Ingleby Farms is another partner. Interesting enough, this is a Danish corporation that has large farm holdings all over the world. Australia, Africa, Argentina, and near Hanford, actually. We have a seed trial going with them to see if we can come up with some of these lands that will be fallowed because there's not enough water. Can there be beneficial uses like grazing if we can come up with a pasture mix which would be native and drought tolerant grazing mixes and also carbon sequestration? So we have 5 trials going there now, and of course the beneficial uses will also be save water, less dust, and keep it in ag. Well, all of our preserves except one we graze as a management tool, and all of the mitigation land, we do a lot of work with solar companies for solar mitigation, and the mitigated lands are usually rangelands, and we make sure that they're all grazed as a management tool. Another use for farmland, maybe that will be fallowed or even in use, could be high water years where we could lay off flood water. I know that's been used in the northern part of the valley. As a matter of fact, this is a picture of one of our preserves. We worked with a local water district, and in a 15-acre plot, we were able to pump water, actually the water district did, into this 15-acre plot, and we sunk over 300 acre-feet of water in 3 or 4 weeks. So we're working with farmers who would be willing to, in high water years and where it's accessible, lay off high water for recharge of groundwater. This is just another picture of that. And the question with farmers is how much water will I be able to pump, and how much will be, how much ground will I have to fallow, if any. 2 weeks ago today, I went to a conference in Bakersfield, and it was put on by Mike Ming and Associates. He's an appraiser, a broker. But what they did is go through Kern County, look at all the ag land, and what water districts they're in. I have a few slides from his presentation. I called him and said, I'll give you credit, Mike, if I can use a few of your slides. And there was probably 100 farmers there. It was actually at the Modern Art Museum, and it was their board meeting, and there were 100 farmers there because Mike had gotten the word out. So essentially he went around, they looked at all the land and what water districts they're in. This is bare land values, and these are mostly all planted. So in 05, you can see at the bottom where land values started. 2017 is at the far right, and then you can go down. Those are water districts based on reliable water sources. And again, he did the research, so it's not state done, but they're looking at comps in those districts. So 18 to 30,000 an acre now for bare ground. It's frightening. This is before Sigma. So a new term for me is white lands, and that is lands outside of water districts for surface water. And I can tell you in Kern County, Fresno County, and Tulare County, on the far east and west of those counties, there are thousands of acres of planted in tree crops. In Kern County, I know it's citrus and pistachios and almonds, and actually in southern Tulare County, it's the same thing. They have nothing but well water. So in 05, some of that bare ground value was at 0. Now it's at 1,500. And I called Mike to make sure these are bare ground prices based on comps. And some of it was 8,000 is already falling to 5,000. And this is the projected impact of what ground might be retired because of Sigma in Kern County alone. Now, I talked to the planning director in Kern County. It's been about a month ago. Lorelei Oviatt, Sophie and I were at a conference, and she said at that time she's looking at 250,000 acres to be retired based on Sigma and just dropping water levels. So the question is, for the ag community, what can we do to make some of this land still have an income stream? So our seed trials are one way to look at carbon sequestration and maybe enhanced grazing land. We're also working with compost on some of those grazing lands to enhance the quality of them. Now, a couple comments. Just sitting here, I could see our history isn't as interesting as really what's coming in the future. And if I look at conservation easements and dealing with, I farmed for 45 years, so my reach into the ag community was facilitated by, I kind of speak ag. And it's hard to BS me when they talk and whine, which all farmers whine. Conservation easement has been associated, as I talked about, with the taking. So we changed to a business tool. That's one thing. We also have to be innovative in how we craft our new conservation easements. I have a farmer that had 500 acres. He only owned 100. He sold off 400. He has 2 sons. They're in south of Kingsburg, which is in the Golden Triangle. That's a tree fruit, absolute prime tree fruit area. It's called the Golden Triangle. I'm repeating myself. He has 2 sons that want to stay in ag. He called me and said, can I do aqua farming? I said, you mean, not aqua farming, but you mean, I'm losing, yeah, not aquaponics, hydroponics. He said, no, aquaponics. For a 1 acre greenhouse, I'll have a 1,000-gallon tank full of fish and another 1,000-gallon tank that I will circulate the water through. And all the rich nutrients from the fish doing what they do, I'll irrigate what I'm going to irrigate in that 1 acre greenhouse. There's not a building envelope for that in the conservation easement. NRCS has another really big problem. It's called impermeable land. I have farmers in Kern County that we had 3 solar sites built in. I fought with NRCS to even get them on the land, and they considered solar impermeable. You only get 2% impermeable of the total land mass. That's absolutely nuts. I said, it's not a roof. You know, they're at an angle. It didn't matter. I applied for an easement, or not an easement. We got 2.66. I mean, it hardly made a difference. They want to put all 3 of those together. That recommendation or alteration has to go back to Washington, D.C. now to alter the easement. That's crazy. If our ag community is going to be so impacted by conservation easement rules, we have to innovate. Here's another thing that is mitigation fees. There's a little town west of Fresno called Kerman. Walmart wanted to go there. They wanted 20 acres. Kerman was thrilled. They made them mitigate 2 for 1. That's even better. And they charged them $1,000 an acre for mitigation fee. They called us in and said, you know, we want 40 acres preserved right on the edge of the town. I said, do you know how much your ag land's going for? Well, that's your job. Well, we can't, there's no conservation easement I can buy for $1,000 an acre on the, just outside of city limit. So how do we change these regulations to make and inform city and county governments on the fees they charge? And here's something that changed my perspective on ag. I was in the ag leadership program a long time ago. And we went to Sweden, and 30 of us got scattered up the countryside and stayed 3 nights with family farms. One night, late, drinking in the kitchen, something they made in the cellar that was really good. We had a conversation late into the night. And my host looked at me and said, Scott, do you know where and we were complaining about all the same things. Do you know where the conservation ag department is in the Swedish government? And I had no clue, of course. He says it's under the Department of Defense. Because if you can't feed an army, guess what? You can't have an army. And it totally changed my perspective about food safety and food security. So maybe we need to look at, as Ed had said, and others, that our land is not just dirt graded from 1 to 10 in prime. It's a national resource, and that it will provide food security for the nation to some degree. And I'll end on this note. Sequoia Riverlands Trust got 30 decision makers, opinion leaders in LA, and we brought them to the Tajon Ranch. And it was for information. We were actually hoping to recruit money, and we told our story about saving farmland in the San Joaquin Valley. Well, I put one slide together that I stole from somewhere, talking about the 300 crops grown in the San Joaquin Valley, and then the percentage of national production. Without a doubt, the room went silent. They had no clue what came out of the San Joaquin Valley other than 99 and I-5, and it's something you drive through. So we have a big job, and that is to communicate the importance of the valley. And the challenge is, of course, very high with the water issue. With that, I'll sit down and take questions.
Thank you, Scott. Anita, questions for our guests here? Yes, Don Cameron.
Yeah, I've got a question for both of you. Let's say you put a easement on some land that irrigated rangeland or farmland, and Sigma does come in, and the values decrease because, really the land use is much less too. Let's say you're 25, 30% unproductive now. So the easement continues with the land at that point, so there's no change in what happens with it?
Yeah, I mean, is this on? Yeah, because it's still with the land now. You've already done your appraisals and your evaluation. The one thing I will say, though, a little bit related but not fully, is some land trusts, Marin Agriculture or Malt and others, they're looking at doing affirmative ag, I forget what they call them, but it requires agricultural production on the easements. And we'll see how it plays out, but that has some concerns because it may become unprofitable with Sigma. But there is a movement to do that in the land trust where our board's not supportive of something like that, even on grazing, because you just don't know what's going to happen in California. But in general, I mean, your easement's based on the appraisal at the time, and then it may affect the value of a whole, and you'll have a discount rate on that easement. And I think we may start to see the discount rates shifting a little bit because of Sigma. I hate to tell you this, I'm a little more depressed than when I came in the room because of seeing the impacts that are projected about Sigma on property values.
Your question is one that I'm asked every single time I talk to a farmer. What if I run out of water? our conservation easement says it must remain in ag. You know, do we need to rethink this? Do we need to rethink term easements? And I know the IRS is involved in this, and I usually cop out by using them as the bad guy. But the truth is, we don't know what's going to happen in 30 years or in perpetuities a little bit longer than that. So it's a big question.
And I also think that Williamson Act is such an important piece of this. And we've kind of lost that momentum, but if you look at the numbers and you look at the impact of the Williamson Act, it's big. I mean, it might be a little bit of a Band-Aid on the dam, but it's very significant.
But it seems that Williamson Act, I think Chris said it this morning, it controls development and it's buying time for some of the other big things to happen. And I think we haven't really pieced it together with everything that we need to do as we take on this topic. So I just think Williamson Act provides some flexibility that we wouldn't have if we only went on some other pathways. Yeah.
So speaking to the Williamson Act, we deal with a lot of developers because they think we're extortion artists because they have to mitigate. And they say, I don't care about the Williamson Act. It's just a cost of business. So that really has to be factored in. What kind of restriction, what kind of fees, what makes it unfeasible for them to just buy out? And they laughed at me. It was a big deal. 13%, nothing, or 12 or whatever that number is. And I will also speak to the Farm Bureau. I have a problem with the Farm Bureau in one respect. And I'll speak of my county. The head of the Land Use Committee is a longtime farmer in the Visalia area. Guess what? He owns thousands of acres around the edge. He doesn't want conservation easements. So I've said to him, you know, what hat do you have on? Your developer hat or your farm hat? So that's the problem that faces all of us, really, in some respect. I sold all of my ranches. Unfortunately, I was 20 miles from any town, so the possibility of selling for development wasn't there. But it is a problem with the Farm Bureau.
I just want to make one other comment, and this is something you all have thought about a lot. We're 95% urban in California. And I think the number is that 50% of kids over 6 don't go outside. And somewhere there's going to be a mosaic of land use. If there isn't one or the other, whether it's public acquisition or farming or urban, it's a mosaic because we're a complicated state. But I think we need to be really figuring out what's coming in the next generation because Farm to Fork's helping, but the environmental community is still advocating for regulations that are suffocating agriculture. And I'm not sure how we communicate it and continue to build those bridges. I think it's better, but I think the opportunity and the work you're doing here is really important of gathering information.
Well, thank you to both of you. And we look forward to our continued work together. And I'll just put a plug in right there. Nita, you brought the topic around full circle. No, sustainable conservation. I think, unfortunately, Ashley had a board meeting today of her group, but they've done such a remarkable job in bringing our environmentalists, which I think all of us are included, and our farmers, which all of us included, together. So thank you so much. Okay, is there any new business or other business? Yes, Joy.
I don't know if you all saw this, but I thought it was absolutely fascinating. About a month ago, the Federal Reserve issued a report on food systems, and that when we invest in food systems, it results in $1. Each dollar comes back as $1.64 in jobs, in community, and in all of those things. And it strikes me that that is just a very compelling argument in favor of going into particular communities and making those food system investments.
What was especially interesting about that is that it was the Kansas City Reserve in the heart of the country and farming that's very different from here that was still highlighting that for the opportunities it does create.
Good point. Joy. Thank you for bringing that up. Martha?
And further to that, and I have been bugging my secretary about the access to capital and the bankers to come. I had a good meeting with the CEO of Wells Fargo and the new CEO of Wells Fargo, and which have some challenges ahead of them. And but he said, interestingly enough, that one of his core businesses is going to be ag in California and across. So it would be good to start inviting them to do a roundtable of the banking system and this type of economic impact. So.
Thank you, Martha. Nancy?
Are we going to take up Don's concerns about NAFTA?
I think we really should talk about it for.
A motion to write a letter,
Yeah.
which I'm assuming Josh has already got
Yeah.
proposed.
Josh is writing it over lunch.
Okay.
No, I thought it was NAFTA and Korea Free Trade Agreement, right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Is there enough said?
Yes. I think absolutely. Other new business, old business, Joy?
Well, are we going to do or say anything about DACA?
So if you haven't seen, the governor's statement came out an hour after the announcements this morning, so I encourage you to read his short and succinct statement. And while it's not specific to DACA, the San Joaquin Valley Partnership Board of Directors at its last meeting voted to weigh in on immigration reform, and the importance of what immigrants mean for the Central Valley of California in all aspects. And I am a co-chair deputy of that, and I have gotten the clearance to sign off on that letter, which is a strong Central Valley-based letter about the importance of immigration and immigrants to California.
Is that something that you could share with us?
When it's supposed to be finalized this week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nancy?
Well, many of the sites that are coming through right now about DACA show that we can take congressional action. And I think that's where the fight needs to go. Yeah, to Congress.
Well, that's where we need to throw our weight.
Exactly. Also, I think I mentioned the last meeting, Ben and I had to leave early, and I just wondered if we could do maybe a brief end of cycle on the composting piece at Harris Ranch, which was the piece I was interested in but had to miss.
I wanted to go back to DACA because Karen, you were quick to respond, but is it not a good idea that this board send a letter?
Well, I think because the governor's weighed in, I'm sure the governor will be, he's made a public statement.
Okay,
Usually he
okay.
follows that up, and if we feel that it's also necessary for the state board, it just has to, all of our letters, if they're going to Congress, all have to go through the governor's office so that we're coordinated and are unified in the messaging that we're sending.
I totally
So I'm
support
happy
that, but I
if
would
you want a
think-
letter
I would
separate.
think that we ought to also send a letter.
I would appreciate that as well.
Is that a motion?
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And we need to go back to Nancy's comment. A quick update on the composting.
Yeah, there was a lot of it. There was a lot of it. Do you agree on that? And they are very enthusiastic at Harris Farms of the Healthy Soils Initiative and really communicating with that. But it was enlightening to see the scale that they're doing this and how much of it is sold and put to use already. I think one of the things we saw in our tour is how many of these practices are being put to work now, which was helpful with our sister agencies who were on the tour. That was an especially helpful aspect. And we continue to have one-on-one as well as interagency discussions about a couple of the glitches we have right now for on-farm composting and what's Tier 1 and Tier 2. And I think that trip is one of many efforts that have helped make it we're in a good pathway for trying to get some resolution on some of that.
I think I'm going to get these statistics wrong, but I thought they said they had roughly 80,000 head of cattle there at 1 ton of manure per cow. Was that correct? And so I think they had per year, 1 ton per year, right? Is that what they said? I thought that's what they said, and that they had, was it 50 rows? They had 50 rows of compost that were probably, they were longer than a quarter So, and you didn't smell it. It was amazing. There were no flies, and well, a few. But I mean,
There
but
was fresh manure, and then there was
right.
Thank you.
Did they talk any about the salt that was in that compost?
I recall.
Yeah. I bet you there's a lot of salt levels.
Salt levels are really high. That's one of the negatives. I mean, I've used composted dairy manure before, and when you go get the analysis on them, I can't use it because of the water that we get. It's just too salty.
They seem to have all of demand.
They do.
Yeah.
Good.
Great. Well, it's
Well,
Nancy.
It was a fabulous tour, and I've spoken to Dawn about it, and I just think for board members, it's,
Invaluable.
essential.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would agree.
I just want to remind everyone that everyone wanted to do it in September versus August.
Thank you, Josh.
Did I say again, would we have 5 crops concurrently being harvested, like, just within eyesight? So that was great planning on Todd's part.
And I have to say also, I think, and Dawn said it a lot too on the trip, is just it's important in terms of bringing the board out and to see ag production, especially in the valley for a lot of, it's a good experience that we definitely need to make sure we do in the future.
I agree.
Well,
Yep.
Well, I know I write a news article for my store, and it goes out to 20,000 homes. And to tell people the amount of automation in those fields, it's just unbelievable. So it was very, very impactful.
Well, it's that special time of our meeting for public comment. Any public member that would like to make comment, we are open to that. And I wish you well to our next meeting. There'll be future harvests. We've got walnuts coming up, grapes ending up.
It's not as dire, and then this is a sad note, the crop is so low. Oh really? Just temperatures?
The whites especially, right?
Actually, the Chardonnay looks better than the Pinot in terms of amounts, but I think it has to do with mold because of all the water when we did get the rain.
Oh, the rain, and the humidity is